What are the main steps if someone wants to apply for the EB-2 NIW? What are the essentials document that a management consultant will need? Why do you think AI is so popular right now for the EB-2?
Are you a management consultant dreaming of making your mark in the United States? Then you're about to discover how the EB-2 NIW Visa could be your ticket to building a thriving career in the US. I am Marcus Bravo, and today we're diving into the EB-2 NIW, a visa that's a game changer for professionals with specialized skills. We'll explore why this visa is becoming a top choice for management consultants just like you. To help me really dive into the details, I am joined by Amin Yacoub. He's an experienced immigration attorney from Orlando who's helped countless professionals navigate the EB-2 NIW application process. So stick around, this is going to be a great conversation.
All right, I mean, thank you so much once again, and it's great to have you here. We're going to get into the EB-2 NIW, which is, I've done tons of videos of it, but I really want to get an expert to talk about it. So let's start with the obvious question. The EB-2 NIW, how is it different from any other employment-based visas around?
Yeah, so the regular way of doing employment-based immigration visas is to go before the Department of Labor and do labor certification. And the Congress in the ENA Act in 1990 actually enacted this law to make sure that foreigners do not replace Americans. So they created a specific exception for the EB-2 NIW, and that's why we say it's a waiver from the labor certification. So the regular way is you have to obtain a full-time job offer, you have to obtain labor certification before you go ahead and get that employment visa and then adjust status. But with the waiver, we waive the full-time job offer, and we also waive the labor certification process, which takes at least a year and a half. So we waive all these requirements, and we go ahead and apply before USCIS, skipping the whole Department of Labor, the process, which takes a year and a half at least.
And what are the main steps if someone wants to apply for the EB-2 NIW? How will they start this journey?
Yeah, so the first step is usually, so are you talking about legally before the USCIS, or are we talking about how do we prepare the case at the law firm?
Like what will be the first thing? Like what would you recommend someone who comes to you and say, well, I want to start, and what would you tell them? Okay, this is how we start.
Yeah. So usually the first step is to gather documents and evidence. So we usually ask clients, please provide evaluations for credentials, academic credentials, of course. If they have a master's degree, then they would have to provide a master's degree. If it's from a foreign university, we would have to require them to get certified translations if it's not in English, plus evaluation as well to prove that it's equivalent to a US-based master's degree. And then from that point, we have to draft, with the help of the client, the proposed endeavor, which must be much more specific than just the general field. So, for example, if a doctor, like a physician, wants to apply for the EB-2 NIW, he cannot or she cannot just come here and say, well, I'm going to be a doctor in the US. It has to be something much more than just becoming a doctor in the US. So we work with them to actually produce a specific proposed endeavor, which is I'm going to be a doctor trying to produce research, which is going to help reduce or stop degenerative disease, for example. So that's a much more specific narrative that we have to get before we actually start the case. Next step will be drafting the business plan for non-scholars and producing scholarship for scholars. What I mean here is basically asking the client to give us all the articles if they're not available on the internet. And if they are available, we would have to download them and print them. But yeah, and then we prepare the immigration forms and probably, of course, draft the petition and then submit the case.
And now when we're talking, obviously, in this specific case, right, we're talking about managing consultants, which is a very, very broad term, as we talked last time. But for someone who considers themselves as a managing consultant, what will make their case a strong case? What will help them out to get this through?
Yeah, so management consultants, they're business people, and business is one of the categories covered under the EB-2 NIW. So in the matter of Amin R, which is the landmark case that actually provided the whole framework for the EB-2 national interest waiver, it said any development in business, science, arts, whatsoever. So business is included in there. But we would have to cover, again, very, very specific narrative to argue that this business consultant or management consultant will bring something to the field that would advance it forward, even a little bit. It doesn't have to be a Nobel Prize winning advancement. But we would have to highlight something that is very specific that would actually advance the field forward, which means would have substantial merit to the field and also would have national importance. And legally, the substantial merit is not broken down into many subfields, but national importance is usually broken down into 4 or 5 subfields, which is are you increasing the welfare for Americans? Are you actually your proposed endeavor, does it have national or international implications on the field? Does it advance it technically or not? Also, does it align with U.S. reports, U.S. government initiatives or not? And finally, which is usually the hardest to prove for business or management consultants, is will your business actually bring in huge taxation to the U.S., make substantial economic impact, or significant hiring of U.S. employees? So all of this is national importance. Many people just read the case or read the landmark case, which is matter of Amin R, and say, well, my proposed endeavor has national importance. But whenever they have to, whenever we draft the petition, of course, and of course the business plan as well, we have to cover each and every specific part. So a management consultant has to offer something, of course, through his business or her business, that would actually do all these stuff, all 4 points. If we're skipping 1 point, we're lowering the chance of approval for the EB-2 NIW.
Now, do you have good examples of what sort of activities we're talking about? Like, what is the most common contribution or activity that management consultants apply with?
So again, it depends on the case. So, for example, a management consultant who worked at automotive places or like in the industry, they would have something to add to that industry in terms of management. But again, when it comes to business, so we would have to be very specific as to the sector that their skills would be applied to on one hand. And on the other hand, we would have to actually say that they are going to create a process or a technique or a methodology that would actually make things more efficient. So if we're saying, well, they're going to be advancing the small and medium-sized businesses by offering consultancy to them, then what kind of consultancy are they offering? Because there are many consultants in the U.S. So again, in order to get the waiver, they would have, to provide something that is tangibly more specific and kind of unique. So, for example, if we said they're going to reduce time taken to produce cars in that factory or whatever by 60%, of course, we would have to substantiate that by evidence. Or like they're going to increase efficiency for small, medium-sized businesses for 78% or whatever. That makes the case much stronger. Of course, again, we would have to get evidence. We would have to, in the recommendation letters, recommenders must actually attest to that. Expert letters, the expert must actually say, well, really, whatever that person is doing, the petitioner, he or she would actually make the difference because his technique or her technique would actually make the difference in the efficiency technically. And usually he cites or she cites academic articles. We usually use academic articles as well, saying, well, there is a latest technique in business that would actually involve AI, for example, or there is a latest software that is at the forefront of business efficiency, and this person would actually incorporate that into his or her consultancy services. And by doing all of that, the management consultant would have a much higher chance of approval, as opposed to a management consultant who just goes ahead and say, well, I'm a management consultant, and I will probably get the approval by just being a management consultant, which doesn't happen usually.
So it's good. I mean, you really have to be specific on like, look, this is what I'm doing, and this is how it affects
Yes.
the
Yeah.
market. Now, you mentioned before certain documents, like that you have to compile a lot of documents and papers that are going to make the case a lot easier. But what are the essentials? What are the essentials document that a management consultant will need?
Yeah, the essentials would be first the credentials, of course, and it has to be evaluated if not from the US. Would either be a master's degree or a bachelor's plus 5 years of experience. And we call it post baccalaureate experience. So if someone actually obtained experience before obtaining the bachelor's degree, it doesn't count. So he or she would have to have a bachelor's plus 5 years post baccalaureate experience, which is equivalent to a master's degree. And then we would have to build the whole business plan, or if they have a business idea, then we would have to make it very specific. And then that's, of course, we would have to have as a document a business plan for entrepreneurs. And for non-entrepreneurs or scholars, we would have to have scholarship. So that's the body of the case: scholarship for scholars and a business plan for entrepreneurs. And also, we would have to have recommendation letters most of the time. Sometimes we get expert letters, and many people think that you actually need to buy or seek a service to get the expert letter. But if you're like famous enough to have someone write about you and say, well, I've actually read his work or her work, and I feel like this is making a huge advancement to the field, that is an expert letter. If it's coming from a professor at a university in the US, and he or she is kind of esteemed in the field. So a strong letter would actually come from someone who does not directly know you, but at the same time would actually attest to the quality of your work, which actually he came across by reading whatever, or actually watching you from a far distance. So acknowledging your name, your work, because you have risen above your peers in the field in a way that actually brings attention of experts. So that is the ideal scenario, of course. Also, we use communication with interested parties. So someone who's an entrepreneur would actually try to reach out to multiple parties to engage them into investing in his business or her business. We use multiple pieces of evidence in all of this in order to prove that they're taking serious steps towards realizing the proposed endeavor. And of course, we draft the petition and we use the immigration forms. And so that's, in a nutshell, is the process for EB-2 NIW.
And you mentioned before, master's degree is sort of a big thing for your application, but it's also a lot of work. Like I mean, years, right? Years of work. Is it as relevant? Is it less relevant when you put them both together? It's like you come just out of a master's degree, or you mean working 20 years in a certain field. Does one help more than the other, or they're about the same?
Yeah. So someone with a master's degree, so years of experience helps when we're proving the second prong, which is that the petitioner is well positioned to advance the proposed endeavor, regardless of the master's degree equivalency. So when I was talking just like a few minutes ago regarding a master's or a bachelor's plus 5 years of experience, we were discussing basically the minimum requirements for the EB-2 category, the second preference employment-based immigration category, which is for master's degree holders. So master's degree holders means someone with a master's degree or a bachelor's plus 5 years of experience, regardless. In order to prove that this person is established enough in their field, we would have to use experience letters, which is a part of the process as well. So if we're proving that someone is having like 10 or 20 years of experience, of course that counts a lot, because we can get experience letters showing that they're having huge years of experience, and that would actually account to why are they established in the field. Uh, Regardless of meeting the first category, which is that they they are equivalent to the master's degree holders. So yes, we use them in establishing the second prong most of the time.
And I know you mentioned this before, but I want to get a little more into the letters, right? You have the expert opinion letter and the recommendation letter. Uh, how do they work? Do they work together? Do they work instead or in spite of the other one? Like, give me
Yeah,
a little more context in there because it's very
yeah.
interesting.
So to many people's surprise, recommendation letters and expert letters do not hold much weight. It's just because they're not primary evidence. So, as lawyers, we have to evaluate evidence as primary or secondary when we're using a case or like drafting or building up the whole case. So, primary evidence would probably be something like that. I would find on Google. So, if I Googled you, I would find some evidence that you're actually real, your business. Some people are talking about your idea that you're actually someone the people keep talking about all the time, and like Musk or whatever. But that's the higher extreme. If someone is starting off and we don't have any substantial primary evidence for, we use all of this recommendation letters and expert letters to convince the USCIS officer that this person is actually the person who's going to bring about that change in the industry, regardless of Google or regardless of primary evidence. So a lot of secondary evidence may amount to somehow the lowest weight for primary evidence, but when we put them together, and we try to subjectively convince the USCIS officer, what happens is they turn into evidence. So it's even when USCIS says, well, uh, a recommendation letter does not count much because we can take it or just neglect it and move forward. That's the law. Again, we can show that by producing an expert letter that collaborates the recommendation letter. We show that they actually amount to something because that's another person that does not know the petitioner, and he or she says the same thing as their recommendation letter. So a combination of both would actually amount to some acceptable evidence before USCIS and can actually make a change. But legally, they're not primary evidence.
All right. Now, you've been, I mean, you help a lot of people with EB-2 NIW, and nowadays, it's still a popular one. But what in the management consulting area, right? What are the kind of projects that they're getting passed, or they're getting actually traction into getting into the US? So, sort of, what kind of activities or expertise are working well these days?
Yeah, I would say anything related to AI or anything related to tech in general, machine learning, AI, also anything that is related to healthcare. If they could produce something in terms of efficiency that would actually reduce healthcare costs, for example. Um, Again, it depends on the field. So each one cannot be just a management consultant. If we looked at anyone's resume, we would actually find some relevant experience back there that says, well, he or she worked at a hospital or worked at, a business, automotive business, for example, or whatever, or like any kind of business, a field, a specific sector. Let's say, if they worked at some company that produces solar energy, for example, that is a sought after, proposed endeavor. If we can make it very specific, so how can they combine their management consultancy services with lowering the cost for solar energy, solar panels, and how would that impact the U.S. environmentally? Would that fight climate change? Would that reverse it? In what percentages per year? So we get to the specifics all the time so that we can actually show that the management consultancy is making an impact on whatever is they're focused on in that industry. Again, just to summarize, AI, healthcare, global. If we're talking about climate change is very important too. Right now, at least. Maybe it's not going to be as important starting January, but until now, it's still important. So, of course, oil and gas might be important as well by next year. So it depends on the industry. and it depends on what they're going to be offering to the industry.
And now, when it comes to demonstrate your contribution, right? Because you need to somehow prove that you will make a change, you will make an improvement. What are the best ways for applicants to show that?
So you're asking about where are we showing that they're going to be bringing that change, like on the papers or
Yeah, exactly. I mean, how can you I mean, you're obviously not going to prove it until you do it, but
yeah.
like, what are the tools that you use to demonstrate that these contributions, like you to show the UCIs?
Yeah, so it's usually four pieces of evidence. The first one would be recommendation letters because they would have to highlight past contributions to the field, and they would have to provide examples, detailed examples of those contributions. So if a client is called X, for example, a recommendation letter must say, well, Mr. X has actually contributed to the field in 1, 2, 3, 4, and each one would have a detailed example saying, well, he actually increased the efficiency of that industry by whatever percentage due to his technique in managing or consultancy or whatever. And he, for example, built or created a software or an app or a technique that actually achieved that end. And when he applied it, it became like an industry sought after technique. And we start saying this across the letters. And of course, expert letters would have to attest to this. So that's one piece of evidence, recommendation letters. Also, expert letters would have to provide reasons about why is the proposed endeavor important to the future as well. So some recommendation letters would actually cover the past and others would cover the future, which is the proposed endeavor. Whatever recommendation letters cover the future must actually attest to the importance of that proposed endeavor in terms of what they bring into the industry, which is, I think, is the core of your question here. So the proposed endeavor's impact on the field must be clarified in recommendation letters, expert letters, in the business plan, in the petition, and I would say publications about the petitioner as well. So if they have anything published about them on the internet, even LinkedIn or whatever, that would actually add a little bit of, it's not like a huge weight unless they're like posted about on New York Times or something like that. But otherwise, it's just if they have the internet talking about what they're doing, then probably we can get that as evidence and use it as a piece of evidence in saying, well, the proposed endeavor does have or will have an impact on the field in the future.
Now, you mentioned among the activities that are relevant right now, and for example, at Journey, we get a lot of AI experts trying to look for a business plan in order to apply for the EB-2. Why do you think AI is so popular right now for the EB-2?
Yeah, it's AI is basically revolutionary right now, and it's going to change the world as we know it, whether we like it or not. So it's going to be incorporated in all industries across the board, and we're going to be living in a world just a few years from now with autonomous vehicles transporting us. We're not going to be seeing any drivers. Probably we're going to see many AI professionals getting much higher salaries than doctors and lawyers. We're going to be seeing AI in accounting. We're going to be seeing AI in management and in all fields. So I think it's going to take us somewhere else, and that's why it's an interesting age. It replicates the internet revolution back there in the around
.com.
2001. Yes, so it's like some people appeared on the TV and said, "Well, it's all a fad, and it's not happening. It's not going to impact our lives." But like right now, we're talking. Probably you're somewhere else, and I'm in Orlando here, and we can see each other, we can hear each other, and probably in a higher quality than in normal life, than in real person meeting. So this is how things are. And so basically, when we're saying that someone is providing something towards the advancement of AI, that becomes something valuable to the American society that maintains the leader role of the US as an inventor and as a leader in tech worldwide. Also, we have to remember that the philosophy behind the EB-2 NIW and EB-1A, why are they exceptional? They are exceptional because the US wants to maintain the leadership role globally. So it's that simple. So if any other country is trying to attract the most talented, the other country is going to win. So the US solved that by basically saying, well, you're welcome if you can bring in huge change in an industry through the EB-2 NIW or EB-1A, and by attracting all these people across the board. So we would find physicists like Professor Yacoub, for example, and we would see immigrants across the board that actually bring in change in the U.S. And statistically, I believe it's 44% of Fortune 500 CEOs and founders were actually either first generation or second generation immigrants. So that's huge. It's like 50% of people who would actually produce in the US. So it makes a huge change for the US.
Now, you've seen a few changes throughout your career. Do you think it's going to change too much? Before we go back to our regular questioning, but do you think after January is it going to change too much? It's going to change for the better, for the worse? The amount of people that the U.S. wants sort of to bring in to stay at the top?
Yeah, again, it's not going to change, and I have two reasons to argue that there is not going to change too much in January and afterwards. First, the ENA Act was actually enacted in 1990, as I said before, and it was the first time that actually a law provides for the national interest waiver, and it has existed since 1990. So no president whatsoever, no Republican or Democrat actually came in and said, "Well, I have to change that law," because remember we have the Congress as well. So you would have to fight your way through the Congress and basically change the law, and that requires a majority of votes, and you would have multiple people saying, well, we cannot change it. Probably it's not going to change anytime soon regarding the law itself, the ENA Act. So that's number one. Congress is the one responsible for changing the laws and producing new laws, and it's very difficult to do so, especially in immigration matters. So I believe the ENA Act, which provides for and it's the source for the national interest waiver, would remain intact throughout the future until, it's not going to change anytime soon. That's number one. Number two would be Trump himself. So there's a lot of media talking about Trump, and he's like that evil figure who's going to come over and basically deport everyone who's not, a white American, probably. So that's not true. That Trump himself, he married all foreigners throughout his life. Many people forget that fact. His best friend right now is Elon Musk. The guy is an immigrant.
Also, yeah.
Probably through the EB-2 national interest waiver or EB-1 extraordinary ability in the past, because they're much faster than EB-5. He could have done the EB-5 as well, because but my point is, Trump himself said that I want to improve the legal immigration and stop illegal immigration. And we have to believe what he's saying, because the matter of dinosaur was actually in 2016. And the statistics show that the approvals of EB-2 and NIW were much higher than now under Biden. So we would have 90% from 2017 until 2020. And then we would have right now, it's sitting at 65%. So that's what we're seeing. So I believe it's going to go back up, but he's going to secure the borders 100%. He's going to stop anyone from coming.
Which are totally two different things, right?
Exactly. Which makes sense. So if we looked at countries like Canada, for example, with the best immigration systems, It's dependent on points. So if you have higher qualities, then welcome in. If you don't have higher qualities, then probably apply, and we will see what we can do. But you cannot just enforce yourself, or force yourself into the borders unvetted, like being a criminal or something like that, and then just force yourself into the U.S. borders because they have open borders. It's crazy, to be honest. So vetting people coming through the borders, stopping them, and saying, well, we're going to actually expand the immigration scheme into basically allowing talented people to come in legally and have adjustment of status, have green cards. I mean, Trump actually said that if you're like a college grad, I would give you the green card. Of course, that's not possible too, because you have to convince the Congress. So it goes back to my first reason why things are not that easily done in immigration. But believing that Trump would actually reverse the whole scheme of EB-2 NIW and legal framework, which he cannot do unless the court, of course, does, because it's a so 2016 was the matter of Don Assault, the landmark case. Only the court has jurisdiction to actually reverse that case or revisit it in the first place. So it's either the Congress or the court at this moment that would actually have the authority to do something about this. Trump has the authority to stop people uh, coming through the borders, that's for sure. Otherwise, it's either the Congress or the court.
There's a much more complex process as well. Now, I'm still going around the challenges of the EB2. There is this thing called RFE, which is the request for evidence. When people go through the premium processing, is there any difference for this to affect that?
Yeah. So premium processing uh, basically increases the chances of the RFE, and it's for a logical reason. So, if we're saying that, just an example, we have 200,000 USCIS officers adjudicating EB-2 NIWs, and you're asking them to adjudicate 5 million cases at once. It makes things very complex for them. So what happens is they buy time. So they do a patch by patch. So they produce RFEs for that patch, and whenever the person replies back in 3 months or so, they go through the second patch and they go through the third patch. So they try to, because they would have to get you a decision by 45 business days. So it becomes impossible for them to actually read all the 500, 600 pages of evidence. Just even if we went and just submitted like 200 pages of evidence, still it's very difficult to multiply
So
this
huge.
by number of cases and require them to actually produce a meaningful decision in 45 business days. Especially that the EB-2 NIW applications went up, I would say tripled. So it makes sense for them to produce many RFEs, especially for non-scholars. So scholars, again, you can actually Google them, and you would find everything on the internet. You would find like someone with 2,000 citations or whatever, and like one famous article that everyone is referring to like hundreds of times. So it's very, very easy to verify scholarship, as opposed to the business plan, as opposed to the entrepreneurship of a person, as opposed to whether that person could actually make it or not, whether they were famous in the past, or like had past contributions to the field or not as an entrepreneur. Like how can we see if that person was successful as an entrepreneur in the past or not? So it's much more complex. That's why it's just across the board. Again, many people receive RFEs when it comes to entrepreneurs through the premium process, because it forces USCIS officers to just produce a decision within 45 business days, and that's a very, very short time period to produce a meaningful decision.
And just to sort of close the idea of the challenges, what is the most common challenge that you've seen for management consultants? What are the things that they're doing that they should be avoiding straight away?
I would say two things. First would be the national importance of the proposed endeavor, because usually what happens is our minds think in very general terms. So if we're talking about oil and gas, we start talking about how the industry will actually grow in the future and bring in huge amount of money to the US. But we forget about what this petitioner will bring into the industry that would actually cause that effect. So it's like we have to break it down to cause, effect, and a causal link. So we cannot just say the industry is going to be amazing in the future. No, we have to say, well, this person through this business will do this technique or methodology, and that methodology would actually increase efficiency, and that efficiency will actually improve the time or resources used in that institution and industry. And by doing that, the industry will actually make it up there in the future. So that's number one in terms of challenges. Number two would be um, showing serious steps towards realizing the proposed endeavor. So many times, USCIS officers would be reluctant to basically believe the petitioner. So they would be like, okay, amazing, you sound amazing on paper, but like you haven't reached out to anyone, and sometimes you haven't shown that anyone is interested in your business, like no investors, no letters of intent to invest, no venture capital investing in the business. You haven't got any papers showing that your business holds a business value at the moment. So how can you convince a USAS officer that you're actually taking serious steps? If for people who are living outside the US, a common question would be, you haven't shown any communication with US parties. And how can you establish a business in the US if basically you're completely isolated in your home country? So it's a bit challenging because the other person would be thinking that, why would I try to reach out if I don't have a visa? So it doesn't make sense for them, to actually try to reach out to interested parties in the US. But at the same time, for a USCS officer, it's like, I have to see tangible evidence that actually provides that you, as a petitioner, would actually be doing something in the US here, and that would actually bring in the difference. So you would have to reach out via emails to interested parties. You would have to get letters of intent to invest. You would have to have agreements. You would actually have to find an office space, for example, uh, even if you're not going to be leasing it or renting it. But
Like you've been
like
looking for.
email communications showing that you're searching for a place to open your company would make sense. But like if you're just sitting around and applying for the EB-2 and NIW and you believe that just again by being a management consultant or engineer or whatever, that gets you the visa, probably you will have an RFE, and probably a denial towards the end too if we haven't worked on whatever I'm talking about right now.
And among all of these incredible advice that you've been giving throughout the whole episode, because I always finish with this question too. What will be your to go advice? What's the first advice that you will give to someone who's like, hey, I want to apply through the EB-2? What will be the first thing you tell them? Like, get this done.
Yeah. My first advice would actually be completely separate from the EB-2, because the challenging part is, how do you maintain legal status in the US until you get the EB-2 NIW approved, and then until you get the priority date to be current so that you actually apply for the green card? Uh, in between, you may actually fall out of legal status. And if you did, then probably we cannot help you much. So if someone is, for example, a student, then if he or she is a PhD student, then probably they have like 5 years. That's amazing because they would maintain legal status for 5 years, and EB-2 and IW priority date would be current in 2 years, let's say. So that makes sense in terms of the timeline. If they're applying from abroad, that makes sense as well because they're safe from falling out of legal status. So the most complex cases, I would say, would not be about the EB-2 and IW itself. It would be about, how do we maintain your legal status if you're like coming in as a tourist and now you want to apply for the EB-2 NIW, which is possible because you're an amazing professional in your field. but you have only 6 months and you have to get out of the US. So you either go out and go back to your home country and do it through the consular processing, or if you want to stay here, you have to either convert status into something else, find employment, go through the H-1B process, have an H-1B visa, which maintains your legal status until we actually adjust status in the future. So I would say that's the number one challenge. The advice regarding the EB-2 NIW is, I would say, uh, being able to cooperate and being proactive, which really matters in my experience. So if someone doesn't want to do anything, even 5%, so we usually do all the work, but it's like 5% if we ask you to highlight from your technical expertise in one page, like what can you do? And we guide you and we provide comments. And we say, well, please make it more specific. Like as a business or like a management consultant, what have you done? What can you think of in your field? What scenario can you actually improve? And they come back to us and say, well, I can't do it. So I would say we end up doing it basically, but that's my number one advice. Just be proactive in, I would say, 5-10%, and that would matter a lot because each and every person would actually have their valuable input because they have experience in the field. We've talked about people with 10, 20, 35 years of experience. So you cannot convince me that after 25 years of experience, you didn't find anything that is bad in the practice or like something that would actually you can improve. You know, it's just impossible to believe. But uh, just whenever they're like
Put a little effort. Put a little effort.
exactly, just put a little effort, and that would amount to a lot because once we have this technical detail in the paper, we can improve it dramatically and we can actually take it from there into something that would win the case. But if we don't have it, I have to rely on reading multiple academic articles and I have to actually be the expert in the field so that I can build something up from there, which takes a lot of time too. And it's like we do flat fee here, so it doesn't amount to much here. But in general, we do our best for our clients.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, that's sort of what we wanted to cover today. I know there's much more that we could cover together, but I want to thank you for being with us, and you're a very special guest too, because this is our last webinar/podcast of the year of 2024. So thank you for being with us, and for all of you listening at home, thank you for being with us throughout the year. Make sure you subscribe and stick around because 2025 is coming back with a lot of surprises and a lot of very interesting subjects. And for the third time, I mean, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation. I hope to see you very soon.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus, for having me. Thank you.